my sun, my snow.
Thank you again for joining us today. I'd like to welcome everyone, and I'd like to invite everyone who is on the webinar today to please join ASES for priority access to our monthly webinars. ases.org/join is our membership page. If you do have to renew, you can go to ases.org/renew to renew your membership at any time to be the first to hear about any of our webinars. I'd also like to remind everyone to mark your calendars for ASES's 49th annual conference, Solar 2020, Renewable Energy Vision. It will be at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., June 23rd to the 26th, 2020. The call for participation is now open and will be open through January 15th. Our super early bird registration is also now open and will be live until January 1st and will offer our best conference rates. Go to ases.org/conference for more information on that. I also would like to let everyone know that our next webinar is scheduled to be on December 18th, and we'll cover some more of the recorded keynote speeches from last year's conference, Solar 2019, including speeches from Rupali Podkey, Ellen Anderson, and Kim Havey. Now let me introduce the speaker for today's webinar, Bill Ellard. I will give you a little intro on him. Originally trained in econometrics, statistics, and energy economics, Bill formed Energy Solution Partners. ESP provides consulting services to utilities, municipalities, and businesses exploring opportunities in distributed generation, as well as solar microgrid project development and planning the move towards a 100% renewable economy. Bill has also worked with the city of Boulder, Colorado on its efforts to create a municipal electric utility. With positions on the city solar and natural gas working groups, Mr. Ellard has participated in the resource modeling. Bill has also worked for a utility consulting firm as their electric industry principal, working with some of the largest utilities in the U.S. Bill and I would also like you to know that you can send in questions or comments at any time through the chat room. In fact, we do encourage it. We will be going through a bit of a slide deck during our webinar today on the California wildfires and outages, the spark that will lead to a solar and storage tsunami. With that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Bill.
Welcome to the ASES webinar. We're downtown Boulder right now. Beautiful day. I can see some of the commercial solar installations around Boulder. And we're going to start off by this quick picture here. We see power lines. These are transmission lines and fires. Unfortunately, in California, this has become more the norm, not the rare event that it used to be a decade ago. And we'll be discussing some of the reasons why. And moving more forward, we want to see what kind of solutions we have, especially with storage and solar. How do we get here? So I think everyone around the country has heard about all the wildfires in California, but unless you've been impacted by it, you may not really fully comprehend what's going on. Some of these wildfires, as many of you know, have destroyed tens of thousands of buildings. They wiped out the entire city of Paradise, California, killing 85 people. And it's been deemed that the fires that started these were by investor-owned utilities that were negligent in managing their transmission and distribution infrastructure, the grid. So a lot of the blame so far has been the utility, but we'll discuss a little bit more later, what are the root causes to these problems. And obviously, now that we're into, people dying in these wildfires, the utilities are preemptively blacking out their grid. They're taking large sections of their transmission high voltage lines, and they're de-energizing parts of the grid for 2, 3, 4 days, even a week. And this is not going away. This will continue to happen for the next decade as we build the solution. So this is going to start the incentive for the offshore tsunami entering California. So let's look at maybe some of the critical infrastructure that we're talking about. Everyone can understand if you're at home and you don't have power for a week, just think about what that does to your living standard. You have no TV, you can't charge your cell phone. The cell towers are out, so you have no cell service. The gas stations don't have power, so you can't gas up and drive away. And I had a friend here in Colorado that recently had to drive all the way to LA, move his elderly mom into a hotel, stay with her until they found housing, and move her back, then drive back. This problem is going on for 3, 4, 5 million utility customers in California. Water infrastructure is one of the key. So when power is down, most municipalities that supply water or irrigation, they move water, they pump it all over the place. It's a huge electrical spend. It could be 30 to 40% of a municipality's energy spend. And most of the pumping is electric motors. So without power, they're scrambling. So what a lot of them have done recently is they're buying millions of dollars worth of backup generation. These are usually diesel gensets because they tend to be the cheapest, but then they need to have diesel supplied to them on a regular basis. And the cost of diesel to create power is extremely expensive. It's up between 30 to 50 cents a kilowatt hour, whereas the cost of coal, solar, and wind are all, well below 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So they're spending a ton of money. Department of Resource just spent $100,000 a month just to rent generators. They haven't even started to calculate how much it's going to cost them to actually run for days at a time, but it'll be in the millions of dollars of fuel cost. And these backup generators are highly pollutive. They're noisy. It's obviously not the long-term solution. It's obviously the quick fix to keep some of the critical infrastructure up and running. But the water is critical, fire protection is critical. Obviously, gas stations, grocery stores, they all need to start looking at backup power.
Really things that most of us take for granted every day.
Right. But this has happened before. I think you and I talked about this earlier, Carly, is that when we had the superstorm Sandy, I actually drove through Sandy. I was spending Thanksgiving with relatives in Boston, and I got the weather forecast, and I basically got out of the worst of it, but I drove through Sandy for 3 days. It decimated Long Island, New Jersey, parts of New England. People were out of power for months, up to a year.
Right.
Okay. So this is not just a California story. I think both coasts will be most hit, either with flooding. California, the West Coast, even Colorado here, we have fire problems here. But to understand how we got here, we need to understand how the grid works. Now, the grid really hasn't changed in the last 80 years. We pretty much manage the grid kind of as we have. But we're going to see that going forward, things will be changing, especially in California. The basic structure on the left here, you have a generation station. It can be baseload coal, baseload nuclear, or natural gas peaking power plants that firm the other two. But basically, you need to have a step-up transformer. What that does is it transforms the energy to make it much, much higher voltage. So once you have 50 kV of power, your amps can be low. And having a high current is what causes energy loss and problems with the grid. So you want to move if you need to move energy for 500 miles, you want the voltage to be as high as possible. So you always step up, and you do the same with a solar farm or a wind farm. You need to not only convert your energy with the solar to alternating current, but you need to step up the voltage so it can be moved around the grid for many miles effectively. Then when you get into a city, let's say you have the grid going to up and down California, then it gets down to LA. You need to have individual substations that step down the voltage so it can be usable for your distribution system. The distribution assets, they are the poles and wires that you see around your town. You have little pole top transformers. So you have this whole infrastructure within the cities, and then you have the customers that can then feed on this now lower voltage power. But all of this is connected. It's like a living system. In California, they have Casio, which is the California Independent System Operator that manages their grid. But there are 37 other RTOs, or regional transmission operators, that manage other parts of the Western grid. Some say the Western grid is the largest machine man's ever built. It basically is from the Midwest all the way through California. It covers at least 40% of the US. And in that, let's take a look at California's grid. So this is just a map of the transmission assets in California. So these are the high voltage transmission lines. And these are not the only kind of lines that can cause fires. It can be the distribution system within a city. But over the last 2 or 3 years, most of the major fires have been caused by transmission assets. And you can see what a problem it is. Look at all those lines. We're talking, I don't know how many miles of high voltage lines we have here. And they've been, some of them are, 30, 40, 50, 80 years old. So it's a lot to manage. And for the most part, utilities in California and around the country, they've done a great job of keeping the lights on and protecting us from wildfires. But obviously something has been changing, especially in California, over the last 10 years. So who do we blame? I mean, we always play the blame game. I'm not a big fan of that. I like to move forward. But I think in California, the blame game is going on. And the residents, the government of California, the governor, they're all blaming the utilities. We'll go into why that's not totally fair, but Pacific Gas and Electric will use them kind of as the template. They are the largest investor in utility in California. They have actually not done a great job of maintaining and fireproofing their assets in the transmission area. And they've just been, a verdict was handed down by the PUC, a 700-page, outlining how negligent they've been over the past decade. So there is blame for sure to utilities. But let's look at some of the, what do you think some of the other causes are, Carly? We talked about global warming.
Right. So climate change, there's going to be more fires happening regardless because of the droughts, less water happening. And then we talked about these companies in these cities building neighborhoods up against these wildlands, or as you call them, the WUIs, the wild and urban interface.
Right. Yeah, that's, obviously it's a big go-to phrase, the WI, but it looks like close to 50%. And here, since the 1990s, the study says 43% of all new structures in California are built up against this area. I like to call it the wildfire zones because these are zones that can catch fire. I lived in Hollywood and LA for years, working for Universal Studios and other companies. So I've lived up against the foothills. The foothills in southern, California, they're beautiful. They every spring they turn green. The grasses and bushes grow. Some of these bushes are 10, 15, 20 feet tall. Then in the fall, they all die and turn brown. But over the last 10, 20 years, all these new subdivisions are being built right up against this fire zone. And it's getting worse and worse every year. So it's unfair to blame just the utilities when the state zoning and city zoning, municipal zoning, not only are they building right up against the WI without any protection, their fire code, they're allowing buildings not to be fireproof. These individual structures they're building can be far more fire resilient if the codes were put in place. So we need better building codes. We need to really, really make sure that we never build another subdivision up against the fire zone until we have a total fire barrier for them. And also we're going to talk about the investor-owned utility business model. While I'm a big, I've worked for utilities for years as a consultant and directly, people that work at utilities are great people, just like people that work at Google. Everyone wants to do the right thing. The problem is the business model. The investor-owned monopoly model is a terrible business model, and it is also to blame. And we'll discuss why. So here's a big thing to understand. Capital expenditure, Capex versus maintenance spending. So how does a utility make money? So we'll talk about the various forms of utilities, but for an investor-owned utility, they have a franchise monopoly. No one else can compete with them. So there's no incentive for them to innovate. There's no incentive to have cheap electricity. Matter of fact, their shareholders want more money, so the push is to increase electric rates as much as you can. And the way they get to charge for their rates is by adding money to their transmission assets and infrastructure. They don't get a lot of money on maintaining their distribution systems. So operations and maintenance, they get their money back, but they don't get 10 plus profit on top of it. They have a cost plus model, and the way most of the states work, they give you 10 plus on the assets that you put in the transmission area. So where are they going to spend money? They're going to gold plate the grid. And the largest investor in utility in the state of California is Pacific Gas and Electric. Their lines have caused more than 1,500 fires in the past 6 years. So, and obviously, to be fair to them, they have the most assets, they have the most mileage of transmission assets, but that's a lot of fires in 6 years. The Camp Fire was the deadliest. I think this was a game changer for the state of California. It's not just money we're talking about. You can rebuild homes, but the entire town of Paradise was decimated, killing 85 people. So it's a changing point on many levels. So from now on, utilities are going to be so careful. Whenever there's high winds and there's a lot of dry brush, every spring, every fall, they're going to de-energize large sections of their grid for days, even weeks at a time, because they cannot allow the Camp Fire ever to happen again. And that's what's going to lead to the solar tsunami. Not necessarily the fires, but these preemptive, preventative blackouts that will be going on for decades. They're not going to go away. The winds aren't going to start dying down all of a sudden.
Right.
So this is critical. Now, the company has filed for bankruptcy because it's been sued by the state for being negligent. Also in California, they can be sued. They can be sued even if they weren't negligent, which is one of the few states that you can argue whether that's right or wrong, but it is what it is. So PG&E is going bankrupt.
Well, and then California can then be an example for states in the future to go from what they've had, these rolling blackouts, to kind of building up a new energy economy in their state, setting an example for other states.
Oh, I think this is going to be a template. This is going to be a template. There are other states that have different templates. We'll talk about the state of Nebraska and the state of Texas. They have a different template for utilities. But for the most part, large investor-owned utilities run the entire United States grids, the Eastern and the Western Interconnect. So, and it's the business model that's the problem, not the utilities.
Right.
We'll talk about that. We need a new business model, and actually, I think it's coming. And actually, we'll state a report just released on November 8th, 700-page report. Basically, they claim that PG&E failed to maintain and inspect and maintain that large infrastructure they've been getting paid on for decades. So they're negligent, they are culpable, and that's why their stock price has gone from over $50 a share down to 10. And the bonds that they own, the debt, I'm sure the debt holders have taken a haircut as well. So there are 2 or 3, depends how you look at it, kinds of utilities. I'm just going to talk about the 2 types, nonprofits versus for-profits. Remember, most of the US grid are investor-owned for-profit monopolies. That's kind of the problem, is that if you have a monopoly where no one can compete and you give them government-enforced protection and they're investor-owned, it leads to higher and higher prices, gold-plating the grid. It doesn't lead to more fire resilience, okay? Because that's operation and maintenance. They don't get cost plus on top of that typically. Now, the other form of utility is very common, publicly owned. The city of Sacramento, the state's capital, has SMUD. So they've had their own public utility for years. It's run by the city of Sacramento. The board of directors are probably on the town council. So you have local control. You can vote your own members that run the utility in and out of office as you see fit. So it's a better business model on multiple levels, but we'll use SMUD as the example versus PC&G because they're right next to each other. And we also, a lot of people call a co-op is typically an electric utility that may supply energy to 1 or more towns. It's very common for a co-op. We'll talk about the Platte River Authority later, PRPA. They provide power to Fort Collins, Loveland, Estes Park, and Longmont of Colorado. So they supply power to 4 cities. SMUD just takes care of their own city. They supply the power and take care of the distribution assets within their city. They have lower outages. Their rates are 30-40% lower than investor-owned utilities. The board of directors are local. They can be voted in and out of office. Most of the people on the board of directors own property, including businesses in those towns. So what do they want? They want cheap rates and maximum uptime. They don't want gold plating the grid for profits. And of course, they get to borrow money cheaper. Municipal bonds are much cheaper than investor-owned bonds. And as such, they also care about their residents. A lot of co-ops in municipal cities, they underground their distribution system. I hate looking at poles and wires going all over the place. Right. They're dangerous too. cars are constantly running into them.
Right.
Winds are constantly knocking them down. I mean, do you like the aesthetics of pole top transformers?
No, I never have. Growing up in Illinois, they're everywhere too, and it's not attractive, and they're not safe.
No, they're not safe. And actually, there are pictures from the turn of the 1900s when there was a huge battle going on called the Current Wars. It was the battle between George Westinghouse and Thomas Edison that basically created the grid we see today, the grid on alternating current. Thomas Edison believed fully in a DC model, direct current. But unfortunately for him, he started building out a direct current microgrid in New York City, and there were wires going all over the place between buildings, and it was just a hack. The infrastructure looked terrible. With alternating current, you can move power more without losing power at that time. So that was the battle that was going on. Nikola Tesla actually invented the inductive motor, which was the game changer. And all the motors that were built fully on AC. They can only work with AC. So the Battle of the Current Wars, there was a movie out if you're interested, go see it. But it was a huge battle, and that's why we have an AC grid, alternating current. Direct current just goes from one place to another. Alternating current goes back and forth at 60 times a second. That's the hertz. So interestingly enough, I think we're going to start seeing this old grid model start to change.
And then California hopefully moving towards more of the underground system for their
Exactly. I think especially, and we'll talk about what I think, if we do have a system of various co-ops and a public transmission authority, they'll look at all their assets. Individual cities will spend the money just for aesthetics and for resilience to underground the distribution assets. And that's much cheaper because most cities are digging for cable. They can kind of time it so they can bury the power along with some other key services. The high voltage transmission lines are much more expensive and difficult to underground, but they can be done, and we will discuss that. So while I was doing this presentation, I was going to give everyone here my proposals for what a new California grid could look like. And unfortunately, before I could even finish, breaking news a few days ago, December 5th, 110 California cities have come up kind of what my plan was going to be. They're already preempting me. It started with the city of San Jose. San Francisco tried to buy out the assets from PG&E last year, and Pacific Gas and Electric said, we don't want to sell. Well, I think in California, they're not going to have that option.
Right.
Okay. There's a growing feeling, tsunami, let's call it tsunami. There's a tsunami of hatred for PG&E, but that hatred is going to be looked at as to transform the business model from a for-profit organization to one-to-many electric nonprofit co-ops. And that's what this group is going. And they have a majority of the state of California on their back. The governor has not pushed this so far. The governor of California has been trying to get another investor to come in, like Warren Buffett, and take over. But no one's talked really that hard about taking away investor-owned utility model from California. But in my mind, it's the best solution. And it sounds like this is going to get some serious spin with this just breaking. And the timing is right because the utilities, the investor-owned utilities in California do not have a lot of respect right now.
Right.
And just to show you the difference between a public versus a private or for-profit organization in electric utilities, on the very far you see SMUD. The average family there spends $114 a month. If you live one town over in Pacific Gas Electric's area, you're paying $184 a month. I haven't done the math. That's more than 30-40% increase.
Yeah.
And then you see Roseville Electric, another co-op. Surprise, surprise. They're only $113 a month. And then way on the right, you have San Diego, another investor-owned utility. Forget about that. They're double what SMUD's paying. I mean, the big reason is over time, their main stakeholder are investors. Investors want more and more dividends, more and more profits. Okay, that's the main, not the only reason, but the main reason. So we can see that, public co-ops are cheaper, and SMUD, even their commercial clients, are on average, they save 33%. If you're spending $100,000 a month on electricity as a business, would you like to save 30% on that? I mean, you got to be kidding. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. This has got to be the future for California.
And just in case people don't understand electricity, I'm sure many people here understand the grid, how it works, about electricity. Utilities basically get money, whether they're public or private, in three different ways. One is they sell kilowatt hours. They sell volumetric wattage, the usable form of power. And as you know, wattage is volts times current, volts times amps. Volts is the force, amps is the speed. So when you get to your little 200-watt old light bulb, that's how you get usable power, is voltage and amps. The price around the country right now for residential is just above 13 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you consume 1,000 kilowatt hours, what would your bill be? Uh-oh, Carly. Come on. 13 cents, you use 1,000 of them.
130?
Yeah.
131. Okay, I'm not a math person.
No, that's about it.
I can do that.
That sounds right. But as you notice, we have in California, they're paying close to 20 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's residential rates. Now, commercial rates, they get charged on 2 or 3 different things. They get charged volumetrically per kilowatt hour they consume, but that rate is very, very low. They also get charged by the demand charge. The demand charge is the highest 15-minute average during a month. And the demand charge is almost like a set service fee. And the utilities have found that they've been, every rate case they get, they put more and more of the money on commercial and industrial clients on the demand charge. Why? Because it kills energy efficiency economics. It also kills solar economics. It prevents the customer from self-generating, because you can never attack that one spike. You don't know when it is unless you submeter your building. You may have that spike several times a day, several times a week. It's become, some clients are paying 70% of their bill is the demand charge. Okay, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So and some companies get charged based on their power factor. So if you have a poor power factor in an industrial commercial application, you'll get charged a third fee for having a bad power factor, meaning the active versus reactive power is not phased right. And basically your motors in your building are taking in the power, but then spitting back 10% of it back to the grid. So the utility can't charge for that. So there are 3 different ways they charge, but it's mainly the demand charge and kilowatt hours.
So here we have some Energy Solution Partners proposals. Number 1, create a statewide public entity to manage the grid and have numerous local co-ops decide their own generation choices, also known as community choice aggregation, and their own distribution system design. This would look like a nonprofit version of the Texas utility model.
Right. So in Texas, they're the only deregulated state. Most states have 50 different public utility commissions, PUCs, and they're supposed to, quote unquote, manage these monopolies, right? But they're usually appointed by the existing governor, and there are usually 3 of them. So 3 people in each state decide the future of electricity in those states. And this has been a very, very bad model. But Texas is a bit different. Most of the utilities in Texas are for-profit organizations, which we just discussed is bad, but they have segregated the transmission assets and the generation assets. So there's one company, CenterPoint Energy, that manages the grid. They're not allowed to own generation assets. They just basically manage the grid as the PUC lets them. But then you have dozens of other for-profit companies that actually, when you move to Houston or move into Texas, you'll get proposals from 10 different companies on who you want to be your provider. And they generate electricity different ways. And you can get different types of plans. You can get levelized billing where you just pay $100 a month every month, regardless how much you use. Or you can get all your electricity from wind. I mean, so there is actually some competitive free market forces at play in a deregulated environment. But still in Texas, most of these utilities are still investor owned. So what do they want? They want to maximize their profit, but except for CenterPoint, these other companies at least have to compete. And that's why you see more innovation, more wind, more solar than a lot of other conservative states.
Right. Another proposal, have 10 to 25 municipal co-ops with larger cities like Sacramento, SMUD, San Francisco, San Jose, LAWP, San Diego, and other regional co-ops in the northern parts of the state.
Right. So this is, I'm thinking the best model for California will be a nonprofit version of Texas, meaning you'll have one operator, probably Casio, that's the California Independent System Operator. They are one of the 38 regional transmission operators of the Western Grid. They manage California. They'll take over the management and cost of managing the transmission assets throughout the entire state. They'll be like CenterPoint Energy is for Texas, except they're nonprofit. They have no incentive to make money. They just do what's best for the state and the best for ratepayers. The second part of it would be you'd have 10 to 25 municipal co-ops that will manage their distribution assets, design it the way they want. A lot will start undergrounding the ugly poles and wires for resilience and also for fire resistance. And actually for long term, it costs less. And the bigger cities are already moving that. San Jose wants their own utility. San Francisco does. San Diego will. And then you'll have smaller cities. You may have a co-op that manages 10 or 20 cities in Northern California, but they'll all be public utilities with no profit motivation. They want to minimize fire danger, keep electric rates low, and maximize renewable energy penetration. A new thing I've been thinking about is having a consumer bill of rights in California. It will replace all demand charges with time of use billing, and that will incentivize more customer-owned generation. And how would California pay for this? It really, the beauty of a public co-op is they can borrow money at much cheaper rates. I think a lot of utilities, when they talk about, they like to get revenue bonds because they want to match the revenues they get from the ratepayers to balance the original purchase price of taking over the utility. But I think they need general obligation bonds as well. They're cheaper, but also that means everyone in the state pays for some of this fire prevention, not just the ratepayers.
So some more proposals for a more fire-resistant grid. I think we had talked about this before, utility scale, ground-mounted solar fire barriers. Oh no, we haven't talked about this yet. So this is great, and I think a really, really smart idea and something that definitely needs to be implemented within California are these barriers between cities, buildings, and these wildlands with solar.
You know, I've been thinking about this for years. I wrote an article on right-of-way highway solar 10 years ago for Clean Technica. Basically, when I was commuting from Utah to LA on I-15 on both sides of the highway, all I see are weeds, grasses, right? And then I see mowing operations and pesticides being sprayed. They're fighting the sun. Why are you fighting the sun?
Right.
It's used up land. Put solar on it. Okay.
Right.
Anyway, so these fire barriers up against the WI will have to be substantial. These are going to be utility scale. We're talking 100, 500 megawatt solar arrays. They will have to go a quarter mile out away from subdivisions and homes. It'll cost a little bit more in the land preparation because you want to even go beyond where the panels are to make sure they don't melt. Solar panels are very fire resistant. We're talking aluminum and glass, right? It doesn't catch fire. But if you let the fire come right up against your solar arrays, they will damage them. So there is going to have to be additional money spent on land preparation to make sure that there is a zone. And each district can decide how big that zone has to be. If you live in Northern California with big trees, big wildfires, you may need a mile barrier or a half-mile barrier. But these barriers will help minimize these occurrences from occurring again. Another great way would be right-of-way solar along not railroad right-of-way, transmission line right-of-way, and highway right-of-way. It's already used up land. If you prep it and put solar on it, at least those portions of the land cannot catch fire or are less likely to catch fire. When cost effective, bury underground the transmission assets. It is to do that. People have said, well, all PG&E's assets should be buried. Well, to do everything is going to be foolish. It'll just cost too much money. But there may be some sections that need to be buried. Some sections can be eliminated. They can actually remove their transmission assets if we go more distributed generation with microgrids. So there's going to be different solutions throughout the state based on the economics of each solution. So I think we'll see substation level microgrids. That's the area where the high voltage comes down to the cities. This way, the entire city can be off grid when the transmission lines are down. But they're going to have to build out these microgrids. They're cheaper than the existing grid, but you still need the capital and financing to build them. This is going to be a boon for the economy, actually, in California, I predict. Like the state of Nebraska, we didn't talk about Nebraska. They're the only state that does not allow investor-owned electric utilities. And they're a conservative state. So in 1930, there was a huge push in the 1930s against monopolists, against banks, railroads, and electric utilities. That's where we have 6,000 municipal utilities today. Most of them were formed in the 1930s and 40s. Very few have been able to fight the investor-owned utilities and start their own utilities since then. Back then, they had the public against the utilities, just like they have today in California.
Right.
So Nebraska has a bunch of co-ops, and their rates are some of the lowest in the nation. Surprise, surprise. And they don't have tons of wildfires and grid outages.
Right. And they're setting examples for other areas. Like I know Boulder wanted to municipalize our utilities.
Right.
as well.
And I was part of the team
Yeah.
that did the original grid modeling for Boulder, and it was obvious years and years ago even that we could eliminate coal from our generation mix,
Right.
replace it with natural gas and some solar, and be as cheap, if not cheaper, than Excel. So we did the modeling. It was comprehensive. And now today, the city of Boulder is still fighting the investor-owned utility. The fight against Excel is hard. Excel is not disliked by the public like California utilities are. And to be honest, ever since the city started their own battle to try to create their own utility, Excel has moved much more into renewables.
Mhm.
I think the city of Boulder had an impetus there. They don't want to see, city of Boulder is only 5% of their revenue, but then they don't want to lose Denver.
Right.
Denver can, Boulder can do it cheaper and no coal. Hey, we're going to start.
Right.
So
Exactly.
Xcel Energy they're an investor-owned utility. They operate in 13 states, so you have no local say, local control. But they are, in my opinion, Xcel is doing as good a job of any of the IOUs
Right.
in moving towards this new energy economy.
Yeah.
But we'll see where that goes. Seems like we have another vote coming up to see if the city wants to have its own utility.
Mhm. All right, great. That brings us to some questions and comments. Looks like Rosanna had a quick comment saying that SDG&E has effectively used grid isolation switches to minimize the impact of PSPS events.
Right. I mean, again, we've talked about Pacific Gas and Electric doing the worst job. I guess they're talking about the San Diego utility. I've heard the same thing.
Okay.
There are other utilities that have done a much better job of isolating lines,
Right.
minimizing the outages. Part of it can be the territory. Pacific Gas and Electric has power lines in extremely rugged terrain, all up and down the wildfire zones.
Mm-hmm.
San Diego is much more heavily populated, but they do have similar issues. There are subdivisions that have been built up against the foothills,
Right.
but they have done a much better job, and so has LAWP, the Water Board of LA. So
Right.
other utilities have done a better job, but I think they're going to have the same problem though if they're a public shareholder, investor-owned utility. I think the movement is going to be for the whole state, like
Right.
Nebraska has done. They're going to basically state that investors cannot own electric assets in our state.
Right. So how can other states do that? Like how can California finally rid of PG&E? Is that a state vote? Or is that the investors finally saying, all right, fine, have it?
Well, I think it could happen in stages, or it can happen in one fell swoop. We saw earlier, just a few days ago, over 110 municipalities throughout the state, big and small alike, are saying we need public utilities. We cannot have for-profits anymore.
Right.
So the movement's there.
Right.
If it comes to a vote, and that was the problem in the city of Boulder, we did have to have a vote to move forward, and the vote was very close.
Oh,
We won the vote to create our own utility, but very, very narrowly. A lot
Okay.
of business owners didn't trust the city.
gotcha.
Very typical.
Yeah.
I'm not trusting the government to run my utility. Well, these investor-owned utilities are quasi-government agencies anyhow.
Right.
They
right.
don't.
And they don't have your interest.
They have no free market innovation
Right.
in mind at all. They just want to every 2 years go in front of the commission and get a new rate increase. That's it. They basically call themselves rate case machines, because if you let it go 10 years between rate cases, people get sticker shock. So every 2
Oh,
years
my
you want
goodness.
to bump
Yep.
it up another 3%. Now that's for an investor-owned utility. But yeah, some utilities have done it better, some have not. I think in California it's going to come down to maybe Pacific Gas and Electric, since it's currently in bankruptcy.
Yeah.
They may just take that one over first while they discuss the others. They'd be ripe to be bought out because their bonds are trading less than $1, and also their stock price is down
Right.
to about $10 a share now. So the market cap of the company is low. So the state, with raising some bonds, can buy them out quite cheaply, and maybe even paying the current investors at least what the stock price is trading at now, and give the debt holders a decent chunk on the dollar for their assets.
Right.
But I think this is the best way to go, and I see it moving in that direction, because if they had a state vote, the state would overwhelmingly vote to kill these investor-owned monopolies.
Right. Okay. All right, 12:40. Let's move on. We'll come back to some of these questions and comments, but here's an example of these subdivisions being built up right against these foothills.
Yeah, this is the Saddle Tree Open Space Fire, or Saddle Ridge Fire. It just happened a few months back, and you can see the 210 interstate going right up against the wildfire zones. And look at all those homes, all those subdivisions. This is where we need the utility scale fire barriers using solar to protect these subdivisions and homes. We talked about right-of-way in that article I wrote even 10 years ago. It's been estimated that there are 200,000 acres of right-of-way. I calculate you could put 40 gigawatts of solar on just the managed right-of-way. That's 40,000 megawatts of solar. That's a huge amount.
All right, now community-owned energy. This is a bit about how Nebraska became the only state to bring everyone power from a public-owned grid.
Right, and the thing to take away here, Carly, is that the basic line they say here is, there are no stockholders. There is no profit motivation. Hence, we have some of the lowest electric rates in the country.
Right.
So what's the solution? Here it is, the solar tsunami. This is my 7K array in Utah that I installed with an electrician. Again, you can see the entire top of my house is covered with solar panels. So the entire roof is covered with glass. So if a hot ember flies from the fire zone that you see behind in Zion, that those embers land on glass. They don't start a fire on your roof.
Right.
So we'll talk about that. Here's what a ground-mounted array would look like in the fire zone. So you see panels and dirt. Okay, you can see a fire is going to be a hard time to get through this.
Right.
You may melt some solar panels, there may be some homes, but you can see way in the distance, you can see a few buildings. So this is what I envision, is to protect subdivisions and critical infrastructure, basically start putting solar where it belongs, make it multi-purpose.
Right, so Susan, just quickly, are there issues of PV modules getting hit with traffic-related rocks from roadways if we put in some highway solar panels? But I think what you're envisioning is this sort of like dirt path runoff, like mowing everything down and then putting the solar up and then having some more mowed down areas for fire protection in between the road, the panels, and the fire.
Right. The ground prep is key. So Europe has done a lot of highway solar. You need to prep the land properly. You need to make sure that you don't want cars going off the road running into the panels. I mean, there is issues with right-of-way solar. It can be done. I think it's quite cost-effective. What you're seeing here, though, is this is not along a highway. So this just goes on, and if you prep the dirt properly, things will not grow on it. If you have to, I heard goats love it. You just rent a bunch of goats.
There we go.
And they eat everything to the nub. That's why the cattle ranchers used to hate them.
Right.
But basically, you have to spend a little bit extra money to make it a good fire resilient type of solar array. Because past where you stop the solar, you still want to scrape and make sure there's a lot of land that can't burn.
Right.
Also, each building can be its own fire protection zone. Here's a building, an RMI building in the Steel Yards of Boulder, Colorado. They actually put solar on the side. This is the southeast side. So now you have glass protecting the southeast side of the building. So again, it creates more energy and it's fire resilient.
So these building integrated PV or BIPV, as we saw in that last photo, can reduce the cooling demand by up to 30% and is extremely fire resistant, as Bill was saying, if an ember hits the glass.
Yeah, the glass on a module is fire resistant. The Tesla tile roofs are beautiful, by the way. And a lot of the more expensive roofs use those tiles have just been certified to be maximum fire resistance. I mean, this is going to be the norm in California, especially with anywhere near the fire zones. New buildings going to have, matter of fact, all new buildings in California have to have solar by law starting in 2020 anyhow.
Yeah, coat your home in solar, be fire resistant. Another comment from Rosanna, the Clean Coalition where I work advocates for divesting the utilities of their transmission assets, which would incentivize them to focus on distributed resources. What do you think of that in addition to moving to public utilities?
That's kind of what we talked about. Actually, that's kind of the plan I had, is that the large transmission asset would become public And then you'd have numerous regional co-ops, and they can define how their distribution and community choice asset aggregation, what kind of generation assets they want to buy from. And in most of California, they're going to want solar.
Right.
I mean, solar energy efficiency, demand side management, microgrids. I think microgrid solutions are going to be key. We see here this the fire station here in Fremont got noticed about. They created their own fire grid, their own microgrid, because they do have backup diesel gensets as backup power, but their diesel supply only lasts 72 hours. And now we're seeing week-long outages. The gas stations are closed; they can't run. You may not get diesel, so your fire station or your grocery store or your hospital may not get diesel. They may be out of luck after 2 or 3 days. That's why the solar tsunami is going to take over. They're going to make sure their top of the roof has solar on, the sides. They'll have carports here all have solar.
Yep.
You shouldn't have parking lots baking in the sun or the top of a flat roof baking in the sun. Can't happen. So, and it's costly to have diesel running. So the economics, I think this is going to be the key. Not only do you want a fire-resistant grid, not only do you want to have safety and maximum uptime, solar and wind are now the two cheapest generation assets we have, by far. It's not even close anymore. So here's just the average cost, the levelized cost of energy. Over time, you can see on the very bottom, wind and solar are far cheaper than coal, gas, or nuclear. And the costs continue to plummet. In 2008, the cost to produce a solar module was $4 a watt. By 2012, it went down to $1 a watt. Now, the actual price that they sell them at is down to 35 cents a watt. And judging by the recent conference calls, the cost to produce the modules is down below 25 cents a watt. That comes from just 10 years ago, over $4 a watt. So here we see the maximum solar potential, and California is just perfect, especially the southern half of the state. It is just screaming. They get so much sun, the economics of solar are just compelling. And here are the new records we've had just in the last year. Arizona, 2.4 cents to produce at 20-year power purchase agreement. Then we went down to 2.4 cents. Then we went down to 2.2 cents. Then in June, Los Angeles, they got a PPA for 25 years, under 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Saudi Arabia just announced a new record, 1.69 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's fixed, doesn't go up for 20 years. My predictions are utility scale solar in the better areas like California will drop below 1.4 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's going to happen within the next 3 years. Another key point in California, Casio, NREL, and First Solar did a demo where they had a big utility scale array. Not only did it create clean, cheap electricity, it actually has built-in features that allow it to help the grid. These solar plants are better than the best natural gas peaking plant at frequency control, at voltage control, at ramping, meaning they could follow loads far faster than even the best natural gas peaking plant. That's extra money that they should be getting paid. They're not, but they should be. And you can go look at the Casio study and NREL study. It's very, very thorough and extremely interesting. So the factors, what are the factors, Carly? 2020, it's already started, but we're almost in 2020.
Right. So starting in 2020, all the new buildings in California must have solar.
And they've already enacted this.
Right.
So this is not because of the wildfires. This is just, they just know that.
Yeah.
And there'll be options if you have a home that has a bunch of trees around it, so solar doesn't work. You can get out of it, but this is a new law.
Right. This is new. And honestly, like the most cost-effective and essential way to provide power during these outages in California. Millions of California customers that already have rooftop solar found out the hard way that the solar inverters do not allow solar to power your home during a blackout. And these customers will look at replacing the old string inverters with micro inverters and storage for the future.
And this has been, I knew about when I installed my system because I asked my electrician. I said, what happens when the power goes down? And he says, well, no, these inverters island themselves because you don't want your panels putting back energy to the grid. And you got a lineman working on the grid. It's a safety issue for the people working on the down power lines. So, so that's the reason that they do that. But now all these people they're in the dark, just like the people that don't have solar, and they've already got their solar system. So the new string inverters, the microinverters, we'll talk about them, are ideally designed for the tsunami, for California, because of the blackouts.
Yeah.
Also in California, some municipalities are mandating all electric homes. They don't want to have a natural gas footprint. And actually, if I built a new home, it would be all electric.
Right.
Because you could use solar, you could use the grid when you need to.
There's no need for that.
And I actually like having numerous, my home, I actually moved to having numerous mini splits. They're so much more efficient, and you can control zones within your home independently. So instead of having a centralized HVAC system, multiple mini splits that are electric work much better.
Right.
And also the EV revolution is really going to make a difference in California and the rest of the nation. It's going to increase loads, first of all, just like the mandate. And that just means more people will look at solar because it's the record low cost option. And we'll look at Enphase Energy's new products. SolarEdge also has some good products too. These are inverter companies. They're launching module level power electronics that analyze the power coming out of each panel and control them. Enphase has the ability, they actually do the inversion right at the panel, meaning they put much safer AC on top of the roof, not the DC. And here's a bit of a look on their new system, which they're going to start selling in 2020. This is their Ensemble solution. It's a fully integrated solution. So you'll have microinverters coming from each solar panel, go to a combiner box. You'll have a smart switch and a load panel. And then basically you have a cloud-based software that integrates everything. You'll have a 3 or a 10 kilowatt hour storage battery, and they all work together. You could have the battery linked to just certain circuits in your home, like your AC or your lighting, or you can just do your entire panel. Either way, you may be able to run your home for days, weeks, months in a row with no power from the grid. And it's cost effective. Again, a sample microgrid for municipalities. You can see you have your renewable energy generation, you got your battery storage and inverters, you've got controls and switch gear. You do need a diesel generator. You need some dispatchable form of energy for the days of isolation problem where you might not have sun for a week in a row, right?
Right. And
then you do need a backup generator, but you may only have to burn diesel for a few hours a year,
right,
or maybe a day a year, not 24/7.
Right.
Here's an interesting case study I did. I did a project where I commissioned a microgrid for a remote town in Utah. And basically they had solar and batteries, but the old batteries melted. And then the owner went bankrupt because he has a hotel, a restaurant, several rental properties, had to shut them down. So I designed a new microgrid. If I just replaced the existing grid, the cost was $8,000 a month. If I added a ton more solar and more storage, it reduced the cost from $8,000 to $2,000 a month. This is what's called a diesel displacement microgrid. Basically, 85% of the generation would be from solar, but still 15% would come from those diesel generators.
Right.
Now, to get to 100%, and this is what my client wanted 100%, the last 5 or 10% becomes very costly because then you have to basically not use a diesel generator at any time, which is just not cost effective.
Right. So James Orenstein has a bit of a comment and question. String inverters with SunSpec rapid shutdown compliant modules are arguably competitive with Enphase and SolarEdge. Why emphasize the latter?
Yeah, it's possible. Again, my background's economics. I actually write articles for Seeking Alpha. That's an investment website where I talk about Enphase, First Solar, SolarEdge. So I'm quite aware of all the different, and at my house, I have a centralized string inverter. You need that rapid shut off for sure. SolarEdge is the cost leader. They're actually the cheapest of the three. Enphase is probably the most expensive of the three solutions, but you could argue it keeps the hot DC off the top of your plate. As an economist, I don't care which solution wins. I love to see them compete.
Right.
And just go for it.
Best. Yep. All right, great. Let's keep moving.
Yeah, just too quickly. We're running out of time here, but I did a study a couple years back on what it would take to make a local co-op in Colorado that's served PRPA. They're Fort Collins, Loveland, Longmont. How much would it cost to replace their coal-fired generation, which was about 90% of the generation? And how can we get to 80 or 90% renewables and we can do it cheaper? So their current cost in 2017 was about $31 a megawatt hour. That's 3.1 cents. per kilowatt hour to create electricity using a blend of wind, of mainly coal and some purchased hydro. Xcel Energy at the same time did an RFP and they got back bids under 2 cents for wind and solar. Under 2 cents. PRPA, it cost them over 3 cents. But you can have wind and solar for under 2. So I used Homer Energy. It's a grid modeling tool. I came up with a plan to get them 80% or 90% renewable by 2025, and it would cost under 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, cheaper than what their coal costs today. And here's the modeling results you see from Homer. The renewable penetration was about 79%, but they also get 10% from hydro. So if you consider that renewable, that brings you up close to 90%. The levelized cost of energy was about 2.5 cents. I have some storage, but mainly mainly the results were 600 megawatts of solar, 450 of wind. So you'd have close to 50% generation wind, 31% generation solar, and then basically under $25 a megawatt hour. And you would do grid sales and purchases at about 20% each. Currently, they mainly do sales. They sell 30% of energy because they have so much excess. They use the grid as storage. But this would lower that risk as well. And batteries are just getting cheaper. We're running out of time, but we used to be $600 a kilowatt hour for storage for lithium ion. Now we're under 100. And here's the Bloomberg survey. It claims here the average is 112 for the cells, but actually Tesla and others are already well below $100 at the cell level for lithium ion storage. You can see here, the storage is getting cheaper and cheaper every year. Also to note, we do have one company that I interviewed last year, Rob Picani from Energy Vault. He's created a system, or they have been funded to create a system that's 30 stories tall. It has individual bricks that weigh 3 tons, thousands of them. They lower and raise them with 3 giant pulleys. Now, in my interview with him, we came across some things. He claims, and I do agree with this, the levelized cost of energy will be cheaper probably than lithium ion because these things will last 30, 50 years. Lithium ion won't. These big bricks are recycled from the company, Mexican company. It does cement. It's modular. You can have one of these towers or 10 or 20 or 100. They can provide power far longer than lithium ion. Lithium ion is a good solution for 4 hours or 5 hours of generation. But these, you can see, they can generate grid scale for days or even a week. They got $110 million of funding from SoftBank, and they're building their prototype in India today. I think it's a great idea. I love competition. I think it will work great with wind farms. I'm not sure if I want to see a 30-story structure near my town or near a solar array, but I think it's great for wind.
Yeah.
But it could be good for remote solar applications as well. The last thing is the EV revolution. This is going to be critical. So you have a power wall at home, right? You have solar. A power wall is 10 kilowatt hours. You can maybe do 1 night, 2 nights on 10 kilowatt. You've got an electric vehicle. That thing has 100 kilowatt hour battery. It's got a battery 10 times the size. Like you could power your home for a week with that thing. So one of the 2 protocols does allow for it. Technically, you can power your home from your vehicle, but this is going to be, Tesla and others, they're going to start working on this now because when they have these big blackouts, it would just be great. You can drive to work, get charged up, you come home, the grid goes down for a week, you can power your home from your EV.
Yeah.
So here's some sample costs. I think we're running out of time. I want to have some questions, but this is even back in 2006, small commercial. I was doing proposals for 30 kW in storage. Cost per watt under $2 a watt. Yeah. Here are the economics for that. So you can see the bottom blue line stays fixed. That's what they mean by the levelized cost. It doesn't go up.
Right.
You get a loan. All the cost is up front. The grid, you can see, is more expensive on day one, but as over time, the cost of the grid goes up as your rates go up. So the savings get more and more over time. Same with a residential array. Here's my home in Utah. The lower part, the $50 a month I pay, the loan I had to take out to build it, but I'm saving $150, $200 a month of my costs. DSM, a solar project, these will be good. I sub-needed some grocery stores just to kind of see what their electrical loads were like. Here you see Soul Foods loads because they get charged. Remember that demand charge is a killer for commercial buildings. So I looked at the demand charge formation. Then I looked at how many amp hours or amp minutes of battery generation would you need to reduce your demand charge by 20%, by 25%. You can see here, to get up to 25%, you start having to need a lot of storage. but you can get a 15 or 20% reduction with a fairly small amount of storage. And this will be different for every building. Some buildings, you may just need a little bit of storage to shave that demand charge. And there are companies that do this today. There's a company called STEM, I think it's their name, and they've been doing it for years, where they sell lithium-ion batteries that have software that are designed to shave your demand charge.
Great. Well, if there's any other questions and comments, feel free to plot them in the chat room quickly. If not, I will send out, we have recorded this webinar, so we will put it on YouTube and share it with all of the registrants as soon as it is done getting uploaded later this week. And if you have any questions or comments after the webinar, feel free to contact Bill. I will send you his contact information in an email once I have the recorded version of the webinar ready to go. Oh, KK, can you repeat Bill's full name and give an email? So Bill's full name is Bill Ellard. I will put it in the chat room for you.
Right, and if you guys are interested, I did a presentation for CU here in Boulder. It was called The Solar Wars. So it's called The Solar Wars and the Chump Effect. That's on YouTube. You can just Google my name, Bill Ellard Solar Wars. And it kind of goes into the battle between investor-owned utilities and people that want to put solar on their homes. Mm-hmm. So it's called The Solar Wars. It's really interesting. Email me questions and I'll do my best to get back to you.
Be Ellard at Yahoo?
Yeah. Do that.
All right, great. Well, I put his information for you guys in the chat room, but I will also email this out to you all by the end of the week. Thank you so much for everyone that joined us today. We had a really fun time putting this webinar on for you guys, and I think it's been really great working with Bill, and I've learned a lot just in the last couple hours going over this information, and I hope you guys did too. And I want to go ahead and thank Bill again for all the time you spent on this. ASES really appreciates
ASES is a great organization. We only have two, solar industry groups in the nation. This is more for the public group, which I've always liked that approach. So if you know friends, tell them to join ASES. It's a great organization.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Bill. And we'll go ahead and get this out to you by the end of the week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.